Daniel, I have found someone that can give me the life I want. So this is my wedding ring. I'm not interested again.
Please don't go. Things will change, I promise. Please remember our two beautiful kids. I'm begging you, don't go.
3 years ago, my wife left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, picked up 2 suitcases, and walked out to a car my best friend had sent to collect her. He didn't even come himself. That's how little he thought I deserved. And for a long time, I believed he might be right. My name is Daniel Whitfield. I was 52 years old, running a one-man engineering firm out of a small town in Ohio. And on one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my entire life folded in on itself in about 11 minutes. The man my wife left me for wasn't a stranger. He was Preston Cole, my college roommate, the best man at my own wedding, a man worth $1.8 billion. For 19 years, I thought I knew exactly who my wife was, and exactly who my best friend was. I was wrong about both of them, and it nearly broke me. I want to tell you the whole story, not the highlight reel. The year I slept in a recliner in my own garage because the rest of the house felt like a stranger's home. The folding table my sister set up for me when I had nothing left. The 19-person team we built out of nothing. And the Tuesday, 3 years later, when I sat in a conference room in Washington, D.C., and signed my name to a federal contract worth $2.3 billion, more than Preston was worth on paper, and my name, not his. 2 days after that story broke, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. Melissa. Calling. 12 times in 4 days. Before I tell you how it fell apart, you need to understand who I was before any of it. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of town where the water tower has more personality than the mayor, where ambition usually meant moving 45 minutes to Columbus, not chasing anything bigger. My father was a machinist. My mother taught 3rd grade for 31 years. I was raised to believe a good life was built slowly, with your hands, your word, and people who stuck around. I studied civil engineering at Ohio State, and that's where I met the 2 people who would come to define the 2 halves of my adult life. Melissa Ferris, sharp, funny, magnetic in a way that made ordinary rooms feel important when she walked into them. And Preston Cole, my roommate for 3 years, loud where I was quiet, a risk taker where I was careful. Preston dropped out senior year to build a logistics software company. Everyone thought it was the worst decision we'd ever watched a friend make. 10 years later, it sold for a few $100 million. 15 years later, after pivots into real estate and data infrastructure, he was worth $1.8 billion. Serious money, but nowhere near the kind that buys you out of consequences forever, as it turned out. Melissa and I married the summer after graduation, with Preston as best man because my own brother was overseas and couldn't make it back. I remember his toast that night. Daniel's the only person I know who never once asked me for anything, even when I had everything to give. That's why I trust him more than anyone alive. I want you to remember that line. It matters later. We built an ordinary, good life. I started Whitfield and Associates, though for most of its life there were no associates, just me, a drafting table, and a part-time bookkeeper named Carol. Bridge inspections, small municipal contracts, the occasional parking structure. Honest work. It paid for a modest house with a good backyard, 2 kids, Emily and Jason, and a life that, for a long time, felt like exactly enough. Melissa climbed from an entry-level marketing coordinator to regional director at a consumer goods company. She was genuinely gifted at it. For most of our marriage, her ambition was something I admired. It only became something else once the gap between her trajectory and mine started to feel, to her, like a verdict on the life we'd built together. I've thought a lot about when things started to shift. There's never one clean moment. There's a slow erosion, and you don't notice the ground disappearing until you're standing on nothing. If I had to point to a beginning, it was about 5 years ago, when my firm lost a county contract to a bigger outfit that could underbid a one-man operation. Cash got tight. At our kitchen table one night, Melissa asked me, not cruelly, just tiredly, "Daniel, is this ever going to get bigger? Or is this what we're doing for the next 20 years? I told her I loved the work, that big didn't always mean better. She nodded, but something settled behind her eyes that night that I chose not to look at too closely. Around then, Preston started visiting more, always renting his own car, never letting us pick him up. In hindsight, its own kind of tell. He'd take us to dinners that cost more than my firm's monthly overhead, and I was proud, back then, that success hadn't changed him. I didn't see it happening because I'd built my whole understanding of the world on the assumption that trust, earned over decades, doesn't get spent quietly behind your back. I should have noticed sooner. The dinners that happened while Daniel handles a bridge emergency, the new perfume, the phone that used to sit face up on the counter, and 1 year, quietly, stopped. I didn't learn the full timeline until the divorce, when it came out in a mediator's office that what I'd call the affair had been going on for 14 months before Melissa told me anything. 14 months, in which I bought her a bracelet for our 18th anniversary, 11 days before she told me. I've made peace, mostly, with not being able to go back and see what was actually happening underneath the version of those months I lived through. I won't pretend it doesn't still sit somewhere in my chest like a stone. It was a Tuesday in March, 3 years ago, when it ended. I'd just come back from inspecting a water treatment facility outside Zanesville, mud still caked on my boots. Melissa was sitting at the kitchen table, 2 suitcases by the door, not crying, not shouting, calm, in a way that scared me more than anger would have. She told me she'd fallen in love with someone else. I asked who, already half knowing. She said Preston's name like an old fact. I asked how long. 14 months. She told me she was tired of watching me settle. She said Preston made her feel like her life mattered. And then she said the sentence that rewired something permanent in me. You had every chance to be more, Daniel, and you chose to stay small. I didn't argue. I stood there in my kitchen, mud on my boots, and watched my wife of 19 years walk out to a car Preston had sent. Not driven himself, sent to collect her. He didn't even have the decency, after 25 years of friendship, to say it to my face. My son Jason was 17, upstairs doing homework, unaware his family had just come apart 11 feet below him. My daughter Emily was 20, away at college. I called her that night and told her, in as steady a voice as I could manage, that her mother had left us for a wealthy man she'd fallen for behind my back. I lost 22 pounds that first year. Not on purpose. Grief has a way of making food feel pointless. I'm not going to sugarcoat what came next. For about a year, I was not okay. My business slowed because I couldn't focus. I let calls go to voicemail for days. Jason, 17, ended up taking care of me more than I took care of him, making sure there was food in the house, once driving himself to a pharmacy on a learner's permit because I hadn't picked up a prescription I needed. I started sleeping in the garage some nights, in an old recliner next to my tools, because the rest of the house felt like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer existed. If you're in that place right now, I want to say something I wish someone had told me that night in the garage. The verdict of one person, even someone you loved for 19 years, is not a verdict on your worth. It's a verdict on what she needed and what she was willing to sacrifice to get it. I didn't believe that yet. It was true anyway. My sister Karen saved me. She lived 2 towns over, in Fenwick, and showed up unannounced one Saturday with a thermos of coffee and a folding card table. She walked straight past me into the garage, set the table up next to my recliner, and said, "You're going to sit at this table, and you're going to work, because I have watched you build things with your hands your whole life, and I am not going to sit here and watch you stop." Her husband Mike rewired an extension cord that same week, so I'd have power for my monitors. It wasn't glamorous. It was a 52-year-old man running a struggling firm out of his sister's garage, while 300 miles away, his ex-wife posted photos from a yacht with the man who used to be his best friend. But something shifted in that garage. The grief started curdling into something with more use to it. Not hatred, but a quiet, stubborn refusal to let small be the last word anyone got to say about me, including myself. It started with a bridge outside a township called Elder Creek. The original contractor had walked off over a payment dispute, and the county was desperate. I took the job at a fair price, brought on a young engineer named Marcus, and finished 2 weeks early. That caught the attention of Patricia Nguyen, a regional infrastructure coordinator with the Ohio Department of Transportation. She mentioned, almost in passing, that the federal government was preparing to open bidding on a multi-state infrastructure resilience initiative. Multi-year, multi-billion-dollar, the kind of contract firms with hundreds of engineers spend years positioning for. I laughed out loud on the phone. A one-man firm working out of a garage does not compete for something like that. But Patricia said something I've thought about nearly every day since, They don't award contracts like this to the biggest name on the letterhead. They award them to the team that proves again and again that it delivers. On time, on budget, without cutting corners. You've done that for this county 3 times this year. Nobody else in this region has that track record right now. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started building on purpose. Marcus came on full-time, along with another young engineer, Priya. I partnered with Denise Alvarez, a water systems specialist out of Cleveland. Carol went from part-time bookkeeper to something closer to co-founder. We called ourselves Whitfield Infrastructure Group, a name that felt slightly absurd at first. 4 people and a folding table calling themselves a group. You build the name a little ahead of the reality and then spend years catching up to it. The next 18 months were not a straight line. We got rejected, twice, badly. Once for lacking bonding capacity, once losing a final round presentation in West Virginia to a firm with 100 times our headcount. Priya cried in the airport bathroom afterward. That night, I called Jason just to hear a familiar voice, and he said something I've held on to since. Dad, Mom used to say you chose to stay small, but you're literally in an airport in West Virginia right now because you tried something enormous. That's not the same thing as small, no matter how it turns out. 17 years old, and he understood something that had taken me 3 decades to learn. We adjusted, narrowed everything down to flood-resilient bridge infrastructure in small and mid-sized Midwestern communities, a niche most large firms considered too regional to bother with. Denise's expertise filled a gap nobody else at the table had. Marcus built a stress modeling system on nights and weekends that outperformed what the major firms were using. Slowly, we started winning. A $12 million flood mitigation contract, a $40 million multi-bridge project across 3 counties. Each win became evidence for the next bid, and each bid built the case for the one that mattered most. We submitted our proposal for the federal initiative 14 months before the news broke. 611 pages, 11 weeks of work, most nights until 1 or 2 in the morning, from a team of 19 people, a rounding error next to the firms we were competing against. Then we waited 8 months, hearing almost nothing. Life, quietly, had stopped being defined by what Melissa took from me and started being defined by what I was building instead. That shift is the part of this story I most want people to hear. The call came on a Thursday, while I stood ankle-deep in water checking a culvert outside Coshocton. A blocked number. Someone from the federal contracting office, asking if we could have a representative in Washington the following Tuesday. I flew there for the first time in my life. The room, when it happened, was nothing dramatic. Bad coffee, fluorescent lighting, 14 people. They told us Whitfield Infrastructure Group, in partnership with Alvarez Water Systems, had been selected as lead contractor for the Midwest Flood Resilience and Bridge Modernization Initiative. $2.3 billion, 7 years, 4 states, roughly 140 communities. I signed with a pen that didn't feel real in my hand. Marcus had to sit down in the hallway afterward, legs not cooperating. I called Karen, and I could hear Mike in the background saying, "Wait, what? Wait, what?" I didn't think about Melissa in that moment. I thought about mud on my boots in my own kitchen, about a folding table in a garage in Fenwick, about a 17-year-old driving himself to a pharmacy because his father couldn't get off the recliner that week. I felt something quieter than triumph, something closer to proof, not for anyone else, but for myself. The news broke 2 days later. Once a reporter dug into the contract scale and realized it put the value of what I'd built above the net worth of the man my ex-wife had left me for, the story took on a life of its own. My phone didn't stop buzzing for 4 days. And on the 3rd day, a number I hadn't seen light up my screen in almost 3 years called. Melissa. She called 12 times over 4 days. I didn't answer the first 8, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know yet what I wanted to say. Jason, 20 now, told me, "Dad, you're allowed to hear her out. That doesn't mean you owe her anything." I picked up on the 9th call. She sounded different, softer, more careful. She congratulated me first, which I'll give her credit for. Then she told me things had gotten complicated with Preston, that the version of him she'd fallen for in Millbrook wasn't the version she lived with day to day, that the relationship had turned out, in her words, lonelier than I ever imagined money could make a person feel. She asked if we could talk, in person. She said she'd made a mistake 3 years ago that she thought about more than you'd ever believe. And then, I think I fell for the idea of a bigger life instead of an actual person, Daniel. And I think the actual person was you the whole time. I sat with that a long moment before answering. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that I didn't hate her, which seemed to surprise her, and honestly, surprised me a little too. But I also told her plainly, I didn't build any of this to win you back. I built it because I needed to prove something to myself, and I'd already done that, privately, long before this contract came through. You didn't leave a man who was staying small. You left a man who hadn't started yet. And I'm not interested in being anyone's backup plan for when the bigger life she chose didn't turn out the way she hoped. She asked if that could ever change. I told her honestly, I didn't know. Not a no meant to punish her. Not a yes meant to give her false hope. Just the truth, which was more than either of us had given each other in a long time. Today, Whitfield Infrastructure Group employs 61 people across 4 states. Karen still has that folding table in her garage. I asked her to keep it. Jason is studying civil engineering at Ohio State and half jokes about taking over the company someday. Emily got married last fall in our backyard, the same yard Melissa once looked at and asked if this was all we were ever going to have. I walked my daughter down that aisle and knew, clearly, that whatever else had happened, that moment was mine. Clean, whole, untouchable by anything that came before it. Melissa and I talk occasionally now, not romantically, at least not yet. She's in therapy, working through, as she put it, the difference between wanting more and running from something. Preston and I have not spoken since the day she left, and I don't expect we ever will. 25 years of friendship weighed less, in the end, than 14 months of something he wanted more. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The verdict of one person is never the verdict on your worth. It's only a verdict on what they needed and what they were willing to sacrifice to chase it. Grief and defiance can live in the same body. You don't have to wait for the pain to finish before you start building something with it. Small beginnings are never evidence of a small future. Nobody sees the folding table, but everybody eventually sees what gets built on it. And when the people who left come back, you don't owe them forgiveness or rejection. You only owe them the truth, which is simpler and harder than either. Build your comeback because you, alone, in a quiet room with no one watching, decide you're worth the effort. Revenge needs an audience. Proof only needs you. If you're sitting in your own version of that garage tonight, I promise you, it isn't the end of your story. It's usually just where the real one starts. Tell us in comment section is one where, if you're in Daniel's shoe, what would you do? Will you accept her back, move on with your life, or did Daniel needs to consult his children first? Before doing anything, please subscribe and press the notification button for another